Yo guys, welcome back. So today I want to just go ahead and have a more casual talk. This is kind of inspired by Santone's video about gaming healing. And actually I did want to talk about why I'm excited about Lost Ark and the future of Lost Ark this coming summer and further beyond. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. Okay, so briefly, if you're unfamiliar, this is actually my current main 6 roster. Play on NA West, Theamine, and this is kind of what we're looking at. My main is 1700, a little bit more. And then my alts are mostly 1680 with the one bard being 1660. I'm likely replacing the bard with the paladin, but this just kind of gives you a little frame of reference that like kind of what I'm looking at is all of my characters are at least going to be doing normal Mordoom except for the one bard that we're not pushing at this point. So the reason why all that was information that you might need for the point of reference was because I'm kind of looking at doing normal Mordoom overall. I'm going to be getting my main in there for the title on the the third and fourth week. Clear the Storm Vanquisher. But I'm not really interested at all about the first title. And in fact, I think in the past, if you've done the raid, you actually only get the title that you get. So I purposely will not be clearing hard mode on week 1 or 2 because I don't really care about the title that is associated with that. So it does mean that I can kind of relax and chill and do like normal Mordoom or maybe like a 1-2 hard. So now that being said, they also just dropped like a couple hours ago this update from the team. Basically just announcing how they're going to be doing the resurrection system and stuff like that. Actually may even be useful for me when I go to get my title for that second title, because it does say that the June monthly update will arrive several weeks after Act 3. Anyway, we'll have to see. I don't really care too much if it's going to be available. I think by the time I go to get that second title, it won't really be that big of an issue anyway. But I do think it's really cool to also point out that like part of the reason why I'm excited about all these things is like, yes, we are getting a new raid. We are getting the Stronghold and Stylebook portrait systems and stuff like that. Like there's like good updates that we're getting to the game that we didn't even know we were going to get. Like we always assumed we'd get the resurrection system at some point, but we didn't really know when, blah blah blah, right? But this is just kind of leading into why I am excited about Lost Ark and where we're kind of going in the future. And the big point that like kind of brings us all together is Saint said it best is that like they're kind of looking at casualifying the entire game. And the thing is that ultimately that's a good thing. So think back when you were a kid, when you were in college or whatever, how often were you excited about hard homework? Probably very rarely, if ever. The reason for that is because homework isn't just not intended to be hard. It should be like practice problems, things that kind of get you ready for what you're going to be doing later on, whether it be like a project or whatever. And the same thing kind of should be going for Lost Ark. The thing is, we all look at the raid system in Lost Ark as homework, right? It is our homework. We're trying to get our homework done and get our gold. And that kind of conflicts with this idea of having harder content. But at the same time, raids are the only thing Lost Ark has to offer, or they were before we got information about what's coming in the future, right? And so, in a lot of ways, the way that Lost Ark was designed was very much against what it realistically should have been. Hard mode or hard challenging content should never be homework. That's like those two ideas are conflicting, you know? And so, what you want your homework to be is just like, nice, chill vibes where you just kind of joke and you hang out and maybe you die and you get to resurrect for free or whatever, right? But because this game has been so focused around making hard content, and then also that's the only content the game has, it's kind of forced the player base to end up doing a lot more gatekeeping and being a lot more toxic to each other. It's systems in the game that influence how players interact with each other as well as the game, right? And so because of the way the game is designed, I'll just say it, like Lost Ark players are really corpa. And what I mean by that is they want to get in, they want to make their gold, and they want to get out. And there's a reason why up until recently or up until now, we would rate on like Wednesday and Thursday, and we'd be done with everything. And that's the reason why. The reason why is because we're just grinding everything through, getting our homework done for the week, so it becomes less, difficult to pug later on. If you end up waiting until like, Sunday or even like Monday or Tuesday, you'll probably notice that your pug experience is quite a bit worse. And there's a reason for that. It's because all the hardcore players that are really dedicated and probably putting more time and effort into the game are already finished. So those players in your pug lobbies are the people that are, you know, maybe they're parents and so they have kids and they have other responsibilities and they can't just do a Wednesday, Thursday raid night. You know what I mean? They can't raid for those 2 days for like 6 hours and then be done with it. They have to spread it out a bit more. And again, that's just not good for the game. The game's in too hardcore of a spot for what you need to do every single time you play it. And so even if we scroll further down, we'll see that they're making changes to the Una tasks and things like that to make them more casual, something you can do not necessarily every day, but you can get the important mats and stuff from your weekly homework instead. Because even, AGS and I'm sure Smilegate understands that the entire community does look at all these things as homework, whether it be daily or weekly or whatever. And that kind of leads into the next point is talking about what we're getting in the future. So we know we're getting Paradise, which is going to be a new progression path with even alternate gear. That should be, interesting. If nothing else, it's just a variety of content that we can do. And right now there's not very much in the variety of content that we have. So any more content is just going to make things even better for the game. The other thing is that we know we're getting catastrophe mode. We don't know exactly when this is coming. I originally thought it was going to be sooner, but other people have been saying that it might be later. But at some point, we do know later on down the road, we are going to be getting content that is specifically designed to be hard, to be difficult. And to be honest, that's what this game has really needed. A lot of people have been very confused, I think, in what they want and not really, good at explaining what it is that they are looking for the game to be. There's lots of people on the high end that do want harder content. The problem is they're not saying we want harder content, so make, new content. Everyone's just saying we want harder content, we want things to be harder, but that's just not accurate. You don't want harder homework. That leads to a bunch of different problems, and you end up being like KR, where players get burned out because their homework is just too difficult and they don't receive nerfs fast enough. I think the system that we are going to be getting, they mentioned it just a little bit up here, the frontier system, right? We already had that in the previous raid, and I think that honestly really worked out very, very well. And the whole idea is that, like, if you want something challenging, sure, but things shouldn't be challenging forever. And most games don't actually have raids be challenging forever. And so most raids or most games that have raids that I've played, so games like World of Warcraft or other MMOs, usually what ends up happening is you go into that raid, you get the gear from that raid, and you become like exponentially more powerful. There were times when if you would go from having no tier set in your heroic raid or whatever, you do the first like 6 or 7 bosses of the heroic raid in WoW, and at some point you'd end up getting your heroic tier set. And so sometimes we'd go into like lower difficulties and get it too, whatever. The point being is that sometimes when you complete your tier set in those raids, you'd end up doing somewhere from like 25 to like 50% more damage. And there's nothing in Lost Ark that helps you progress a new raid or any raid in any game more than damage. Or more damage means less time spent on the boss. You have to see less patterns. You can sometimes skip mechanics. All these kinds of MMO raids and bosses, they always work better and always feel better when you have more damage. Just kind of the way that it works. And so in Lost Ark, there isn't any system that makes you, boom, I'm suddenly doing 50% more damage, and all of these fights have become significantly easier. Even Karma, I think they said Karma is what, like 16 to like 25% more damage or something at the very end of it. So, like, we're talking, even if you're farming hard mode, it had to have been at least like 2 months or something, right? And so the difference is sometimes in WoW or something like that, you might get your full tier set on the first week of the raid. Sure, that was usually fairly rare, but there are ways to manipulate RNG in ways of in your favor that would help you get there faster. And at the very worst, they had a catch-up system that was pretty much guaranteed, where if you got no drops, you would get that by like, I think it was like week 4 or 5. And so you're guaranteed to get that huge boost. So at most, you're doing quote unquote hard raids from when they came out for like a month. It just doesn't work that way in Lost Ark. And instead, Lost Ark has these pieces of content. Our raids are only pieces of content where you then have to continue doing them for months and then into years. We're going to be continuing to do Belshazzar and Aegir forever. You know what I mean? Like, not actually forever. We're going to get the strike rate, but you get my point. Is that we're going to be doing these raids a long time. You don't replace raids in Lost Ark that quickly because you're always going to be doing your top 3. And so when something's in your top 1 or 2, it's going to be in your rotation for a very, very long time. And so raids just need to be easier naturally. So I don't really have any images to show, so I'm just putting my roster back up for you guys to check out. But what I wanted to talk about too is that with the casualization of the game, the director also said that he was going, or that they were going to change the direction of the game. And I think part of that also comes back to the decisions that they're making as developers. And one of those decisions is that they've nerfed the honing cost of the dead zone. And I think that that's really, really important because it actually kind of signifies a few things. So one, obviously they do want players to be able to get through the dead zone easier, which is good. But two, like, there was a reason why they hadn't done that before. And to be honest, I don't think anyone can doubt or think anything other than they really were just trying to monetize the dead zone, specifically from new players. And I think this is really bad. I've had discussions with a few folks, and it sounds like what a lot of people do when they play KR MMOs is that they're okay kind of forking over money without really knowing the game or playing the game. And so the thing is while that might be okay with some cultures and some groups of people, I think you have to understand that the niche there is going to be really small. And so the amount of players that you're going to piss off by having the expectation that you get the wallet out before they even get to try the game is pretty crazy. And so, like, realistically, what's going to happen is people are going to go, they're going to hit that wall, and they're going to be like, no thanks. You know what I mean? And so they're not going to work through it. I think it's going to be very, very few and far between where people are doing that on a regular basis. Even now, even with the dead zone being nerfed, I think people are still not really going to make new characters that way. And that comes back to, what I said about in one of my previous videos is, while they did nerf the dead zone, they didn't nerf things more before that. And so the cost of things even before that, as I mentioned, getting to the point where you can do 3 gold earning raids is still very high for a new player. And so that just isn't going to work. And so even now that they are loosening up on, maybe trying to monetize that, they are still trying to monetize that because there are ways they could get around it. They could have brand new characters start in tier 4. They could do, a large number of things. They could completely reduce the cost of all those honing things to like nothing, right? They could just literally be free, or they could just have systems in place to give those pieces of gear out, but they don't. And the reason for that is because they are still trying to monetize those players just less than they were before, which is a good thing. Still not quite there. Hoping that the Paradise system, and I believe, as I might have mentioned before, AGS did mention that they were looking at ways for new players or new accounts to have new characters outside of events. I'm looking forward to seeing what that is. I'm very hopeful, but it's at least nice to see that Smilegate is at least somewhat, willing to compromise on trying to monetize that. And hopefully that kind of helps AGS when they do go and say, hey, this isn't working for us. We need a different way. If we are going to diverge from the KR path of the game, which I also think could be possible, and I personally would be excited about, and we'll kind of go into that more in a minute. If we are going to be able to do that, maybe it will, like I said, give AGS some leeway where they can start looking at alternative routes for things, whether it be new routes for new characters for new players, or even just like different progression paths in their own thing that allows you to somehow bring it back to your main progression path or something, right? Some kind of overlap that could make some of these systems that are in the game a little more, I don't know, maybe just less toxic. And then one of the really abstract things, kind of, is I'm pretty sure it could be a translation error or whatever. Feel free to comment down below. It could be a translation error, but I'm pretty sure that the director for the Chinese side of the game specifically said that they were trying to diverge and kind of go in their own way, as opposed to just following the global and the KR version of the game. They're looking at making their own path and making their own content. And so, what I really, really hope is I really hope that either Amazon or Smilegate or somebody can partner with Tencent, who I believe is doing a lot of the development there, and hopefully bring that to the West as well. Maybe it doesn't ever make it to KR, and maybe KR, like I said, just kind of diverges and goes in its own way. At the end of the day, I do think that that might be better for the game overall. And the thing is that the KR audience is really cooked. I don't really know how else to say it. If you guys are following things on recent events and stuff like that, they've been referring to Lost Ark as the meatball game. And what that meant is that the way that KR players look at the game is that the whales are getting put through a meatball like meat grinder and being fed to the quote unquote new players and Makokos. I feel like if you've played this game for 5 minutes, you know that that's not true. New players in this game really struggle because, and I've said this before, and I will continue saying it until it changes. Lost Ark has probably the worst new player experience of any game I've ever experienced. It is so horrifically bad, and honestly, new players can never catch up, and that's part of the problem too. If you actually think that the game is like suffering because they're helping the new players too much, I just feel like that's just like it's just a different cultural experience that they're having. And so like I don't know if the game can ever survive in a way that like can make people happy who don't have that experience. And I'm trying to be as nice as I can try and be about this, but ultimately like it just doesn't make sense. The the whole point that they have about like having assets that have investment value and maintaining value and stuff like that, it's just like a really weird like concept that shouldn't exist in this game or any other game. And unless Smilegate themselves can do something about it, maybe it would be better for our version of the game to diverge from Korea if they really want to go that route and see what happens when they only cater to whales and they stop trying to even remotely help new players. But like, I mean, they just now nerfed the dead zone. Are we really thinking that Makokos are eating good out here? Really? You know what I mean? And like I said in my past video, like while the dead zone's nerfed, the other stuff isn't. So, not much has changed. It's still horrifically expensive for new players to get into this game. But that just a cultural expectation thing, right? Maybe in KR they're just kind of like, all right, well, when you start a new game, you got to fork over like $200. That's just not going to work here. And to be honest, I feel like that probably won't work for super long in KR. I mean, if they're going to experiment with the idea of just following and doing whatever the whales want, then, by all means, sink your own ship kind of thing. But I would like to see them figure out ways to make people happy and not sink the ship. And so maybe doing that is having us and China split off and do our own thing, and having KR split off and do their own thing. And if their player base can survive with that kind of like, maybe if they don't feed the whales to the Makoko, it's such a crazy concept. It's hard for me to even remotely imagine that. And the thing is, I understand where they're coming from, right? The point that they're coming from is like, oh, well, I spent a crap ton more to get there first, and then people are catching up to me. But that's literally how these games work. And that's how every game works. And so just because you get there first doesn't mean that you get to be first forever, right? When you go and you pay a bunch of money to get something, or let's say in WoW, right? you want to go and get a whole full set of brand new BOEs from the harder versions of the raid. You can do that. You can totally pay to win a bunch of WoW tokens and get a bunch of gold and then obtain a lot of really good BOEs that will make your character stronger. But people are going to get gear from that eventually. And so, like, just because you spent money on that doesn't mean that, like, that gear is forever going to keep you that much more ahead of the other people. By spending like that and having that kind of mentality, the idea is you have to always continue to do that. And so if you sign yourself up for that, then that's kind of what you sign yourself up for. But it's like game design doesn't work like that. If you just paid money and everything just maintained your investment forever, then one, you're never going to spend money again. And also, like, people aren't going to play because they can't ever catch up to where you were at. Like, no matter how many hours they put into the game, you spent money, so you'll just be infinitely farther ahead. Games just can't work like that. It's not feasible. It's just not how game design works. And it would be bad game design to try and do something like that. So that's why I say, like, that kind of idea just doesn't work in practice. Okay, so obviously that got a little ranty and stuff towards the end. The whole thing just, like, baffles my brain. The entire point I was making is that, like, if the Chinese version can branch off from Korea, then I don't see a reason why we can't do the same. Now, whether or not AGS will put the resources into making that happen, I don't know. But I do think that AGS is aware that the way the game is right now, people are spending money. There's not a coincidence that, like, when we see Stoops whale or something like that, we don't really see the metric move, right? We don't really see it sales like increase that much for Lost Ark. But when we get a new patch with a big update with the Ark Pass and maybe some skins and shit like that, like, people, like, a lot of people drop money. And so maybe we get like a really good package. A lot of people are going to drop money and buy that really good package. And so, like, that's not going to be a revenue stream that AGS wants to lose just because AR is going their own way. So I do think that there is room for us to be our own thing, or to maybe, kind of collaborate with the Chinese version of the game and, like I said, diverge from Korea. We'll have to ultimately see. I'm curious to see how the whole Korea situation is going to pan out in the end. I don't know if things are still on fire over there or if everyone's still feeling meatball game, meatball game. But none of the changes that I've heard are going to change the whole meatball game idea. So maybe it's just like a, people in Korea kind of parrot things more or something situation. I don't really know, but I haven't heard them talk about it. So maybe things have chilled down over there. Also haven't really had time to watch Memo. I've been playing a lot of Crystal Atlan. So we'll have to see how things end up going in Korea. And I am excited to see, the future and all these things that we've kind of been talking about in the coming months for our version. If nothing else, Paradise sounds fun. Catastrophe mode sounds like it could be an extra piece of content that isn't part of our homework that we can enjoy and play more of the game. Like, there's going to be new avenues, new things to do, and that's going to be really, really important for this game long term. So ultimately, I am excited about the future of Lost Ark. I do think it has places that it can go, and even ways that in the future it could try and bring folks back. But it's kind of going to depend. Are we going to continue to see this level of, commitment to making the game better, expanding what's available to do? Or are we going to try and go back to doing, okay, this is a raid game that only does raids and has all of these issues? So we'll have to see how it goes. The director hasn't really had a huge, good track record at the moment. But I do think that the AGS team is doing what they can to provide our kind of feedback to them. And I think, personally, I have nothing to support this or anything, but I think a lot of the changes that are coming to both the Chinese version of the game and to the Korean version of the game, all this Paradise stuff, I think this very much comes from our region specifically requesting this stuff and having, needing more stuff to do in the game. I don't know how much of an issue that was in Korea because, I mean, the raids are so much harder. I think they just have to spend so much more time. So I do think that, like, a lot of the good things that are happening in the game and the game moving forward are because of our region and our feedback. So if you are providing feedback, thank you so much. Continue to do so. And hopefully, things like this and, us just talking about the game will get more ideas floating around out there and we can come up with more solutions and help AGS along the way. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much. As always, interact with the video down below. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see more. And yeah, I'll catch you guys later. Oh, I am going to be streaming on Twitch, our usual like Wednesday, Thursday raid. And then I have been doing Crystal of Atlan. So feel free to come by and hang out. If you haven't checked that game out, definitely do. And I'm going to be making some videos about why you should be checking that game out if you haven't already. So I'll catch you guys later. Peace out.